On the evening of May 11th, 2008, in a township called Alexandra on the edge of Johannesburg, a crowd gathered in the streets and started chanting 4 words in Zulu, Fancy Amakurakwere, down with foreigners. Then they split into smaller groups. They went door to door, and at every door, they asked one question: what is the Zulu word for elbow? If you couldn't answer, they beat you. If you ran, they chased you. By the time the violence ended, 3 weeks later, 62 people were dead, 670 were wounded, and 100,000 had been driven from their homes. But here's the part nobody talks about. 21 of the dead were South Africans. This is Africa Realpolitik, the channel where we cut through the slogans and look at what's actually happening on the continent. Today, we're answering one question. Why does South Africa, the country Nelson Mandela built on the dream of a rainbow nation, keep turning on other Africans? You've heard the easy answers. They're stealing our jobs. They're taking our houses. They're criminals. The politicians say it. The newspapers print it. And every few years, the country erupts again. But when researchers actually tested those explanations against the data from a peer-reviewed study using a representative sample of over 2,000 South Africans, matched with census data from 185 municipalities, the easy answers fell apart. And what they found instead is a story about something much darker, something governments don't want you to look at directly. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand South African xenophobia better than most South African politicians do. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers will shock you. Back in 1995, just 1 year after Apartheid ended, when the world was celebrating the new South Africa, the World Values Survey ran a study across 18 nations. South Africa came out as the most xenophobic country in the entire sample. Not in Africa, in the world. 3 years later, in 1998, 72% of South Africans said foreigners should be required to carry identification at all times. 66% said the country's border fence should be electrified. Fast forward to 2006, a survey found that nearly half of all South Africans wanted every foreign national deported, regardless of whether they were there legally, and the favorable view of immigrants. It never went above 26%. It didn't matter if you asked black or white South Africans. It didn't matter if you asked about Africans, Europeans, or Americans. The hostility was the floor, not the ceiling. Then came 2008, Alexandra Township. The violence I described in the beginning. It spread from Johannesburg to Cape Town in days. 62 dead, 100,000 displaced. Government's first response? Denial. They blamed criminals. They blamed what they called third forces. Anything but the obvious. Between the end of the 2008 attacks and April 2015, 350 more foreigners were killed in South Africa, murdered specifically because of where they were born. And then, in April 2015, it happened again. This time, it started in Durban. The trigger was a speech by King Goodwill Zwelithini, the Zulu monarch, who reportedly referred to African foreigners as lice. Within days, the violence spread to Johannesburg. The UN Security Council issued a sharp criticism. Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Malawi all condemned South Africa publicly. And Nigeria, the continent's other heavyweight, recalled its ambassador. This wasn't a one-off. These weren't extremists. This is a pattern. Theory 1. Resource competition. The idea is simple. South Africans and African migrants are fighting over the same jobs, the same houses, the same scraps. When the pie shrinks, conflict explodes. This is what every politician says. They're taking our jobs. The data? Mixed at best. Yes, people with low education levels were more xenophobic. But here's the twist. It wasn't the unemployed people actively looking for work who were the most hostile. It was black South Africans between 25 and 49 years old, prime working age, who had given up looking, people who had stopped competing entirely. Think about that for a second. The angriest people aren't the ones in the fights. They're the ones who've already lost hope. Theory 2. Poverty. Maybe poor people lash out. Maybe deprivation breeds aggression. The data partially supports this. People who'd actually experienced poverty in the past year, going without food, water, electricity, medicine, were more xenophobic. But here's the catch. When researchers controlled for how people evaluated the economy, the poverty effect almost disappeared. In other words, it wasn't being poor that mattered most. It was believing the economy was failing you. Perception was a stronger driver than reality. Theory 3. Symbolic threat. This one comes from European research. The idea is that immigrants threaten your national identity, your culture, your way of life, so you push back. In South Africa, the data showed essentially nothing. Strong national identity had, if anything, a slightly negative effect on xenophobia. Being from a minority race group didn't increase hostility either. Whatever's driving this, it's not a culture clash. So the easy explanations they don't hold, or they only tell part of the story. Here is what's actually going on. The real drivers of xenophobia. Here's where the data points to something the politicians don't want to discuss. Relative deprivation. This is the feeling that you've been left behind, not in absolute terms, but compared to other people in your own country. You look around. You see Mercedes-Benzes pulling up to gated estates. You see your neighbor with a job at a multinational, and you're still in the same shack you were in 20 years ago. South Africans who felt personally deprived relative to other South Africans were significantly more hostile to immigrants. The gap between expectation and reality, that's the fuel. Frustration with the government. This one is huge. Among Black respondents, the feeling that the government doesn't listen, what political scientists call low external political efficacy, was a strong predictor of xenophobia. Among white respondents, negative evaluations of government performance had the same effect. Different races, same underlying problem. People feel ignored, they feel failed. They feel like the state has abandoned them. Social mobilization. People who attended community meetings showed elevated xenophobia. People who participated in protests, strikes, and collective action were more likely to say they take part in anti-immigrant violence. Why? Because community meetings, particularly the township policing meetings studied by researcher Jean-Pierre Misago, were the actual venues where the 2008 violence got organized. The community didn't stop the attacks. The community planned them. Now, look at those three drivers together. Relative deprivation, frustration with the government, social mobilization through community grievance. What do they have in common? They are all about anger that has nowhere to go. This is the heart of it. This is what every politician on the continent should be forced to read. When South Africans are poor, they get angry. When they feel left behind compared to their neighbors, they get angry. When they believe the government has failed them, they get angry. When their employment prospects collapse and they stop even trying, they get angry. But here's the question. Who do they direct that anger at? Not the government that promised them transformation in 1994 and delivered 50% youth unemployment. Not the politicians who turned the ANC into a patronage machine while townships rotted. Not the elite, black or white, that captured the post-apartheid economy. They direct it at the Zimbabwean shopkeeper, the Mozambican laborer, the Nigerian businessman, the Somali running the corner spaza shop. This is what psychologists call scapegoating. Frustration produces aggression, but the aggression doesn't go to the powerful party that caused the frustration. It gets displaced onto a weaker, more visible target. A target that can't fight back. A target the government will not protect. And this is where it stops being just a South African story. Because every country in Africa, every country in the world has a version of this dynamic. When governments fail, somebody has to be blamed. And it's almost never the people in power. It's almost always the people with the least power. In Nigeria, it's been Igbos in the north. In Côte d'Ivoire, it was Burkinabe migrants. In Kenya, it cycles through Somalis and various ethnic minorities depending on who's in office. In Ghana, periodic flare-ups against Nigerian and Lebanese traders. The script is the same, only the cast changes. South Africa just shows us the pattern in its most extreme form, what this means and what could change. So what do we do with this? The researcher who ran the analysis, Christopher Claassen, draws two conclusions, and I want you to hear them clearly. The first conclusion is economic. If poverty came down, if unemployment came down, if the broader outlook for ordinary South Africans improved, xenophobia would decline. Not disappear, but decline measurably. The problem is that economic transformation has been the stated goal of every ANC government since 1994, and they have not delivered it. The unemployment rate when Mandela took office was around 20%. Today, it hovers above 30%, and youth unemployment is over 60%. The economic lever exists. Nobody has pulled it. The second conclusion is political, and it's actually more achievable. If the government simply did its job, delivered services, listened to citizens, ran municipalities competently, xenophobia would decline. The data shows this clearly. People who feel heard by their government are less likely to displace their anger onto migrants. People who experience competent local administration are less likely to scapegoat foreigners. In other words, you don't need to win the lottery to fix this. You need ward councillors who pick up the phone. You need water that actually arrives. You need police who investigate. You need leaders who don't compare foreigners to lice. That is within reach. South Africa has chosen, repeatedly, not to reach for it. And until that changes, every few years, the violence will return. The targets will be Zimbabweans, Mozambicans, Nigerians, Somalis, Ethiopians, Africans, whose only crime was crossing a border drawn by Europeans 140 years ago to look for the same dignified life every human being is entitled to. Here's the part I want you to sit with. The xenophobic violence in South Africa is not really about foreigners. It never was. The violence is what it looks like when an entire society's frustration gets pointed at the wrong target by leaders who know better in a country that should know better, against people who came looking for the same future South Africans were promised. If we want a different Africa, and I have to believe most of us watching this do, then we have to be honest about how scapegoating works. We have to refuse the easy story. And we have to demand more from the governments that profit when we fight each other instead of looking up at them. That's it for this episode of Africa Realpolitik. If this hit you, if you learned something, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment with your perspective, and share this with someone who needs to see it. I read every comment, and I want to know what this looks like from where you're standing, whether you're in Lagos, Lusaka, Johannesburg, or anywhere else on this continent. Until next time, stay curious, stay honest, and keep asking who benefits.